So, how about we cue the epic podcast intro music? Podcast. Good God, that wasn't epic at all. Well, at least this interview will be. So, first things first, who the heck are you, man?
I am an enigma wrapped up in a pig in a blanket with a craft single and a slice of bacon. No, I'm just a guy that grew up in Brooklyn, New York that loved video games and loved sports and loved pop culture and just got lucky enough that I went to college and I did the right things and got opportunities and now, you know, 25 years later, I'm a college professor, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a voice actor, I'm an author and stuff like that. So just a regular dude that happens to like a lot of nerdy stuff.
And there you go. That's Patrick Hickey Jr., author of The Mind Behind the Minds. There's many of them behind the games and a few others in the series. We have The Minds Behind Sports Games and The Minds Behind Adventure Games. I would hold up the hard copy in front of my camera right now. However, I have a nephew that is enthralled in the book.
Oh, that's
So
awesome. There you
it's
go.
over at his house and he's reading it. I do, however, for reference, have the uh, review copies that McFarland, your publishing company, was so nice to send me. I thank them very much for this.
Awesome.
I have been burying myself or more drowning myself in everything that is your books. And I have to say, I am just blown away by the amount of digging you have done to bring these books to light.
Thank you.
Tell me, what made you decide to sit down and go after all these people and get them down on page?
Spite. There's a great episode of Seinfeld where Jerry doesn't want a jacket anymore. And he goes to return the jacket to the store, and they're like, "Why are you returning the jacket?" And he's like, "For spite." And they're like, "We can't accept the jacket back for spite. There's not anything wrong with it or anything." He's like, "No, I'd like to return it for spite." And it's just, oh my god, it's hilarious. But the main reason why I decided to do this was I was kind of at a crossroads in my life. I was 33. My wife was about to give birth to our first child, a couple of months away. And I just felt like I had been an editor at NBC. I had written for a whole bunch of places. I was about to get tenure as a college professor, but I felt like there was so many things that I hadn't done yet in my life. And as a writer, writing a book is definitely like one of those things. If you call yourself a writer, you've got to write a book, and I hadn't yet. And I just realized that I was surrounded by so many people at work that considered themselves scholars and academics, and they had never done it either. So I'm like, I'm about to get tenure. I'm about to have like a job for the rest of my life if I want it. And I wouldn't be able to answer an 18 or 19-year-old's question if they ask me, how do I get a book published? So it's like, how much have I done with my life if I can't even say, as a writer, somebody with a master's degree in journalism, I mean, I've written thousands of articles, but I've never written a book. So I'm like, yeah. So it's just one of those things that I wanted to do. I didn't know if I was ever going to get around to it like right away, but what had happened was one of my bosses at work, I went to him. I'm like, let's start a multimedia journalism program at our school because I'm the assistant director of the journalism program. And I'm like, let's create a multimedia journalism course. Let's take our program to the next level. And this guy's like 15, 16 years older than me, and he's just like, nah, it's okay. We don't have to. We're good. And I'm just like, oh man. So I saw it was just like the DeLorean passed by me going 88 miles an hour, and I could see the future, and it was just like things staying exactly the same for the next 25 years. And I'm like, that no, I need to go home and I need to think of. So I just like blurted out to this guy who I shared an office with for like 10 years, but now like after he said that, it was just like everything was just like out the window. It's just like I can't be associated with somebody that doesn't want to grow, you know? And I was just like, well, I'm gonna write a book. And he goes, well, go write a book, kid. So I went home and I bitched to my wife, and my wife was like, don't talk about writing a book, just write a book. Just go do it. So I went in my man cave, and if you've watched my videos on Instagram, you see like my little man cave. I've got a whole ton of books and stuff, and I'm just sitting, books and
Yeah.
games, and I'm just sitting in the middle there. And I'm like, what is this book going to be about? And I just start pulling out games. Wonder Boy and Monsterland, King's Bounty, Toe Jam and Earl, Mutant League Football, and I'm just like, E.T., Yar's Revenge. Yep, I'm telling you, man. Yep, and I'm just like, I know the people that have created these games. I know there's stories there. I love to interview people. It's my favorite thing to do as a journalist. Let's do this. So I contacted like the 6 or 7 people that I pulled their games out, and I'm like, if I can get half of them to get back to me, then I'll have the beginning of a book. Within a week, all of them got back to me.
Nice.
So I was just like, oh. So this was October 31st, 2016. It's a day I'll never forget. So now by Thanksgiving, a couple of weeks later, 3 weeks later, I've got all 7 chapters written. And my wife is laying on the couch next to me and she's sleeping. We just had turkey and stuff like that, you know? And I'm like, I'm gonna pitch this to a couple of publishers. McFarland was one of them, and 3 days later they responded and they said yes. And they were like, well, listen, if the chapters are as long as what you've sent us so far, you're going to need like at least 23 to 25 games to do a book like this.
Yeah.
And I'm like, oh my God, how am I going to get 23 to 25 games? And I just started sending pitches every day. And I ended up with 36 for the first book. And then it just became something that I got good at. So now every book that I've done so far has had at least 30. And then the Minds Behind the Shooter has 39, and that's coming out like in January or February. The Sega Genesis game that I just finished like a month ago has 43 games. The Minds Behind the PS1 games, which I'm working on now, has 39 confirmed already. So
that's going to be a big one for me. That was one of the first consoles that I purchased myself.
same here.
So
Same here.
I'll be digging into that one heavy.
I got Final Fantasy VII, the lead quality assurance guy on Final Fantasy VII to talk to me a couple of days ago.
Oh, by the
And
way,
I'm just,
folks, if you're listening, spoiler alert, because
yes,
I don't think that's out there right
yeah, it's not out there. You're the first person to have that. And we're talking. He told me that he and his team, they were the first people in the United States to witness Arius her death. And
Spoiler
like,
alert. I mean, the game's kind of
Yeah,
old, but
yeah.
hey.
but the feeling in the office when the first guy was like, "Bro, Sephiroth just killed Aerith," and like the guy was crying, and it's just like, this isn't online anywhere. Like this guy did not tell his story to anybody else, so it's like it's going to be in the book. So I'm just like, So it's been crazy to go from wanting to do something really special to ensure that like I had a legacy, and also to be the best parent that I could be, because you can't be a good parent if you've got all of these stones unturned. Like if you look at your kid and you're like, I could have did all of this, but I had a kid instead. Like you can't be a good father or a mother, you know?
Yeah.
So it's like writing these books in a way makes me feel really strong about myself, in the fact that I feel like I'm a better parent because I've done the things now that I've always wanted to do. So now I can focus on her. So to go from that conversation with that guy that's still doing the same stuff he was doing 4 or 5 years ago, it's like, to where I am now, where next year at this time, I mean, I'm going to have at least 6 books out, 7 like contracts signed for.
Yeah. And
pretty
not
wild.
only does it give you time for your family now that you've put all that behind you, but it also gives a legacy for your daughter and for your son that they can grow up and learn what you've learned.
Absolutely. So it's like a month ago, the first two books got put in Harvard's library.
I've seen.
So it's
Right.
like I told my daughter, I'm like, 'cause she's 3. I'm like, you don't know it yet, but I'm like, one day you could tell a teacher, my father has 2 books in the Harvard library. What do you have? You
Right
know,
on.
so it's just really cool. It's been a lot of fun.
All right. So the minds behind the games.
hmm
What was your favorite part about doing that book? The first one.
The first one was like just so unexpected because it's like I've done so many interviews in my life for NBC, for Examiner, for Review Fix, so it's like I'm pretty accustomed to doing interviews. Um, but I think like for this, it was trying to, because sometimes it's like when you interview a musician and they just want to talk about the new album, the new single. If you try and go backwards with them, they kind of get frustrated, or they're kind of like, well, I've answered that question 1,000 times, blah, blah, blah. For this, it was kind of like throwing all of that out the window. So I remember with Michael Menheim, for Mutant League Football, I was kind of like, Wikipedia says that you guys took the engine from the original Madden. That can't be true. So tell me what really happened. And then he's just like, yeah, I don't know how that got on Wikipedia. And then he told me the whole story, how they consulted with Scott Orr and those guys that made the original Madden, but they designed their own gameplay engine from scratch. So it's like if you watch like so many YouTube videos about Mutant League Football, they all say that Mutant League Football uses the Madden engine because they're just reading off of Wikipedia.
Yeah. Yeah.
So like
And for me, this is something that I didn't want to do. I don't want to go to Wikipedia and just spout stuff. I mean, I do that here and there for the radio and whatnot, but it just doesn't give you the full facts. And yeah, there can be stuff in there that's just totally skewed, you know?
Yeah, so being able to do interviews with people and having that blank slate and not having an angle. So it's like whenever you pitch an article to like a newspaper or a magazine, you have to have an angle. Like what is the article going to be about? And you're very rigid within that space. So every chapter that I did for this book, there was no confines. If I went in wanting to tell story A, I could. But usually what would happen is I would go in and be like, okay, this is kind of like what I want to talk about, but what do you want to talk about? What do you think is the legacy of your game? What do you think is the most important? And I let them tell the story, and then I just kind of wrote around what they were saying to kind of guide the reader. For one of the first times in my career, it wasn't necessarily about what I had to say as a writer. It was trying to protect what somebody else had to say. And I think that's why it's different from the other stuff that I've done. That's why I feel like it's different from a lot of other video game books out there. And that's
Mhm.
why I think it's special.
Right on. Right on. Okay, now out of all the games in the minds behind the games, your first book, which
Mhm.
was your favorite to get the story on?
Oh, that's so hard.
Big scoop that nobody had but you until it was on paper and out there.
So probably the story of Doom on the Game Boy Advance. So the story of Doom on Game Boy Advance is pretty wild. So what happened was David Palmer, the developer, he had worked on third-party games for Nintendo for like 25 years, Looney Tune games, all sorts of games, making a living. And somehow, some way, they got the Doom license. So he is armed with this amazing mathematician programmer who was convinced that he could get Doom to run on the Game Boy Advance. So they design a complete Doom engine for the Game Boy Advance. They're super happy with the way it works. They show it to Carmack and one of the creators of Doom.
Yeah, yeah.
It's for the people that don't know, because everyone goes to Romero first, but it's Carmack too. and a couple of other people too. And Carmack is like, well, I was clearing out my attic the other day, and I found the source code for Doom for the Atari Jaguar. Why don't you run that instead of what you have here? So they did, and that's no easy task. You're getting a 64-bit game to run on essentially a handheld Super Nintendo, because that's what the Game Boy Advance is.
Yeah.
It runs well. It's a very fun port of Doom. However, Palmer feels that his version was even better. So the thing that makes the story even cooler is that my manuscript was due in like 3 days, and he had yet to send me answers back. So I'm at a meeting for work, not paying any attention. I've got my laptop on my lap, and I'm editing and writing, and I'm just like, I need to get Doom in this book. So I email him, and I'm like, listen, I have like 3,000 words left in this book. They're yours if you want them. I'm like, but I need the answers like right now, and I need you to sign the release, and I will work my ass off on this until I have to send him my manuscript. And he replied back like 2-3 hours later, and he's just like, here. And he had very advanced cancer. He was very sick. I thanked him for his time and his energy and his efforts, but I have yet to hear from him since. I've done several searches online to make sure that he's okay. Hasn't answered any emails, which is strange because I still speak to all the developers that I've interviewed.
Uh-huh.
So I hope that he's okay. But it's just like everyone that plays Doom on the Game Boy Advance is just like, oh, this is really cool. They have no idea that it's the Atari Jaguar version. And then they have no idea that somewhere there's a better version that no one will ever get to play. So that's probably like one of my favorite chapters in terms of the first book. There's so many, but that's one that like really sticks out.
Right on. Okay, so let's move on to another genre that you're pretty heavy into, as I note from your Instagram and whatnot. The minds behind sports games.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, sports are a big thing for you. You're into wrestling and all that sort of stuff.
Sure.
Tell us about your journey into the minds behind sports games.
So the thing is, I've written about sports just as long as I've written about video games. While I was still in college, I was covering minor league baseball and minor league hockey. I was going on the road with teams, covering them. Before I started graduate school, I got offered the head of communications for a minor league hockey league that I turned down so I could go to graduate school. It's probably a smart decision because the league folded like 2 years later. But it would have been a pretty cool opportunity. So I love sports. I've always loved sports. I've always loved sports video games. One of my favorite things to do in sports games is just to manage like the game, to manage the rosters, to change the ratings on the players so they're more realistic. You know, it's like I'll spend hours on NHL just going through all of the teams and making sure all the players are in the right, have the right positions, the right play styles and stuff. And my wife will laugh at me and she'll be like, "This is playing?" I'm like, "Yes.
Yeah.
This
Oh,
is
yeah.
playing." So and I've done that. I've played like that since the Nintendo. Like I remember being able to play RBI baseball with real players. I used to tell my friends, "Man, if you could trade players, this would be like the perfect game." Da 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 da. And then a couple of years later, you could trade players, and then a couple of years, and then after that, I'm like, "Man, if you could create players, that would be so cool." And then a couple of years later, that happened. So it's just kind of like my growth as a gamer came through sports games. So I knew, well, to backtrack a little bit, the only reason why the minds behind the sports games exist is because I originally wanted to do a sequel. I wanted to do the minds behind the games too. And my publisher said no. And I went, "What?" And they were like, because I told them I want to have like 43 games. I have 43 games confirmed already. The first book had 36. This has 43. This is bigger, better. And they're like, "No, because could turn this into 3 books. You could have the minds behind the adventure games, you could have the minds behind the sports games, and you could have the minds behind the shooter games. And I'm like, if I break them up, I'm only going to have like 16 in one, like 15 in another, and like 13 in another. And they're like, well, then you'd have to go out and get more games. And I'm just like, so that means I'm going to have to get like 80 more games to fill up 3 other books. And I was like, you know what? Okay. At first, I didn't want to do it. For like 2 days, I didn't answer them. And I was talking to my wife about it. My wife is like, they want to brand you. They want to make this like a series. This is great for you. Don't you see? And I'm just like, okay. So I said yes. And then I was writing all 3 of those books at the same time. It was wild. The adventure book was like the most through. So I really got to focus heavily on sports and shooter. But sports was so much fun because I got to interview so many people that I just love as developers. So like Michael Menheim, Michael Brook, like all of these early EA guys that just left such a huge impression on me as a kid. And to me, as of right now, out of the 3 books that I have out, that's probably my favorite one. Just because like my time as a sports writer and my love of sports and then my love of video games all pushed into one. I mean, it's my favorite book of the 3 that are out so far.
Right on. Now I'm going to make it hard on you.
Mm-hmm.
Same as the first book, through the whole minds behind the sports games.
Mm-hmm.
Which was your favorite story to do?
Oh, the Madden, easily, the original John Madden football. So even though I loved speaking to, there's not one bad chapter in the sports book. There's not one where you're just like, wow, he really fucking called in this one. Oh my god, you know. But I remember sitting in a hotel lobby in New York City with Michael Brook for like 3 hours on a couch with my recorder on, just talking. And then he starts to tell me about Robin Antonick's Madden, Robin Antonick and Trip Hawkins Madden on the PC. How that was the original Madden, and that wasn't a moneymaker, and EA was in really bad shape financially. And I knew this, but I didn't know how Michael Brook's football game that he was working on with Scott Orr, which was like EA arcade football, they saw potential in that. And they were like, you know what, we're going to rebrand this as Madden. And we're going to get John Madden, to take a lower royalty rate. And we're going to turn this into a success. So when he started telling me that, I was just kind of like, all right, this is getting really sexy. This is getting really good. This is a good chapter. But probably like halfway through the interview, he talks about how, and I'm sure people listening remember that Electronic Arts had different looking carts for the Sega Genesis.
Yeah.
And that was because they had a team of amazing people that backwards engineered the Sega Genesis. And they were able to produce carts cheaper and save money. And also have more RAM and a whole bunch of exploits. They knew more about the Genesis than Sega did, and what the Sega was capable of. So now Sega's pissed off because they backwards engineered their console. So Sega's pissed off at Electronic Arts. But at the same time, too, all of the games that EA came out with on the Genesis were all licensed by Sega because Sega's not going to push them away because they're a quality developer.
Yeah.
So now Sega is playing the original Madden for the first time. And they're like, this game is really good. We want to buy it off of you. So now Trip Hawkins and Michael Brook have to make a decision because Sega basically in their own way says, if you don't sell us this game, we're going to take you to court and we're going to sue you for backwards engineering our console, and we will win. So now EA knows that they have to sell like 40,000 copies of the original Madden to make their money back and to recoup the losses from Madden on PC. So if they sell to Sega, they're going to sell for that amount of money. But Michael Brook, in his infinite wisdom, says no. He tells Trip Hawkins, tell him no because we could sell a lot more than 40,000 copies of this game. So they start talking to Sega, and they realize that Sega wants them to sell because they have their own football game, Joe Montana Football, that they don't think is nearly as good as Madden. They think that Madden's going to blow it completely out of the water, which we know it did.
Yeah.
Montana Football sold well, but it wasn't Madden. So what ends up happening is Michael Brook orchestrates a deal where Electronic Arts is going to help Joe Montana Football. They're going to look at their game and they're going to offer gameplay critique, and they're going to help them polish the game to make it better in exchange for not getting sued and in exchange for not selling their game. Sega takes it a step further by firing the entire staff of Joe Montana Football and telling EA to finish it.
Nice.
So EA finishes Joe Montana Football. They get absolutely no credit. There's nowhere online that says Electronic Arts worked on Joe Montana Football. Not Moby Games, nowhere. So when he's telling me this, I'm just like, mouth on the floor.
Wow. Yep.
And so what they had to do was they had to make the game better enough that Sega was happy, but not better than Madden because they still needed to sell 40,000 copies. So they went on to sell like 400,000 copies, which is crazy because at that point in like 1990, 1991, there's only like 1.2 or 3 million Genesis at the time. So they had like a third of the Genesis population had Madden. That's insane.
Yeah.
That's market share, because it's like if you have like the killer app on a console, you're talking like 10 to 15% market share. They had twice that. So there was an interesting point during the development cycle where they put the first ever instant replay system in a football game, and they put it in Joe Montana. And after they put it in, they're like, why did we put this in their game? We should have put this in our game. This is gonna kill us. So then the same day, Sega calls them up and it's like, oh, well, how's the game going? Because, it's due in a couple of weeks. We just wanted to make sure that you guys are doing okay. Da, 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 da. And Michael Brook, again, in his infinite wisdom, goes, the game, we're really happy with it. We improved a ton of things, but there's just this one thing, that instant replay system that we told you about. It's really buggy. It's not ready. And they're like, Sega's like, you know what? Don't worry about it. So it ended up getting in the next Madden game, but not in Joe Montana Football. So that was probably like one of my favorite moments of the sports book. Like when he was telling me all of this, I'm just like, this is going to be the last chapter of the sports book. I'm like, this is how we're going to end this. And I was super happy with it. So, and then after Michael told me that, I was just like, do you want to write the foreword to the book? Because I'm just like, you just set the bar so high and I spoke to him very early on in the writing process. So I was just like, and I spoke to him for the first book. He's in the NHLPA 93 chapter in the first book. So by then we were already really cool. He's a great guy. He's amazing. And I was just like, I would love for you to write the foreword to the book. And he did. So it's like to have like a hero of yours have that type of respect for what you're doing and the trust to share that story with me. Because after the interview was over, I shut the recorder off and I'm just like, is that story like anywhere else? I'm like, are you going to get in trouble for telling me that story? And he's like, well, Trip Hawkins told some of it to a magazine a couple of years ago. He goes, but he didn't tell the whole thing. And he's like, he probably can't even find it online now. So as soon as I left, I'm on my phone and I'm like searching online and I'm not finding anything. So I'm just like, yes. So that was the moment for the sports book.
Right on. On to the minds behind adventure games.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, like you said, you were writing all the books at pretty much the same time.
Mm-hmm.
How was your journey filling this one?
This one is this is so weird how this turned out. It has the least amount of games, but it's the longest book that I've written so far. So like the reporting on each chapter is more than the other books. So it's like There are so many fun chapters in the adventure book, but I would say I love Rockstar games. EA, Rockstar, Squaresoft, Konami. Those guys had a huge impact on me as a kid. So it's like I love to get Rockstar and EA games in my books, like the classic ones, you know? So when I decided to do the adventure book, I'm like, I have to get a Rockstar game. And I'm like, I want to get Grand Theft Auto. I want to get the
Rockstar game.
the Rockstar game. And I sent pictures out to like everyone on the team. And it so turns out that one of my EA sources, Don Traeger, who was a producer at EA and Atari for a very long time, amazing guy, he left EA to go work at this upstart called DMG. DMG eventually became Take-Two, and Take-Two eventually became Rockstar. So he was one of the guys that was going out trying to grab up all of these third-party games to try and build the DMG brand. So the 3 games that he had like a really like specific hand in bringing to DMG were Courier Crisis, which is a really fun game if you guys have ever played it. Spider, which is a really cool like 2.5D platformer where you play a spider, a cybernetic spider and stuff like that. Really very PS1 era, but cool, very cool. And of course Grand Theft Auto. So he gave me a ton of great stuff on it. And just how it didn't look great, but he knew how sandbox it was, like how open it was, and how there weren't games like that, and that like people would get sucked into this world because it's just like just walking around the city, the moving traffic, you know. He's like, this is unlike anything that's out at the time. So all that stuff was great, and I'm just like, the quotes he gave me were great, and I'm just like, this is a good start. I'm like, but I need a programmer or an engineer or a designer. I need somebody that like touched the code of the game. So I send out a ton of pitches, and I eventually get to Dave Cowan, who is now on the Minecraft team for Microsoft. Amazing guy. He worked on the 50 Cent game. He's worked on some Harry Potter games, but he was the lead programmer for the PS1 version of the game.
Nice.
And he gave me amazing stuff. He told me one story where this is insane. The game's finished. So now it has to go. Sony's testing protocols. Sony sends them back an email and it's basically like, the game crashes. So he's like, okay, when? How? Like, tell us the bug so we could replicate the bug and we could fix it. We can't tell you that. The game crashes. And he's like, do you have an example? No, game crashes. So they had to go through like every single line of code to try and find out what was wrong. They were stumped. Grand Theft Auto almost doesn't come out for PlayStation until Dave Cowan finds one null pointer reference. It's basically like one little line of code. He fixes it. They send it back. It works. A couple of months later, after the game comes out, he contacts Sony again and it was like, what was going on? And they basically told him that they were testing Grand Theft Auto on PS1 and on the PlayStation 2, which was in development and had full backwards compatibility. So every game that came out on the PS1 in 1997, 1998, 1999, even though the PS2 didn't exist yet,
was already compatible.
Sony was making sure that every game was compatible. So if the game wasn't compatible on the PS2 for some reason, they couldn't divulge the information yet to the developers. Pretty wild stuff to think that Grand Theft Auto 1 almost never came out because of the PlayStation 2.
That's wild. Yeah.
Yeah.
Right on. Okay, so that brings us through the minds behind adventure games.
Mm-hmm.
What's next?
Hmm.
Can you give us little tidbits of the future without giving away too many spoilers?
Sure, sure. So the Minds Behind the Shooter games is coming out in January, probably end of January, early February. I'm waiting on my last set of proofs to edit. So that has 39 games featured. It's going to be the biggest book that I've done so far. Just to give you a little bit of spoilers, not everything, but some good stuff. So like Halo 3, Metroid Prime, Call of Duty Modern Warfare, those are like the new sexy first-person shooters that are in there. But Chiller is in there. Um, Phoenix. There's a whole bunch of Atari 2600 shooters in there. So it's just like every type of shooter game that you could imagine, like first-person shooters, third-person shooters, rail shooters, arcade shooters, light gun shooters. They're all in here. So it's probably my least favorite genre of gaming, but working on this book, I played so many shooters that I definitely have a soft spot in my heart now for shooters because they're just so dynamic. Gears of War is featured in the book, so
Right.
this it's probably the best lineup of games that I have in a book so far. So whenever people look through my books, they're always like, "Oh, you got this, you got this, you got this," but you don't have this. And sometimes it's kind of like, well, this is hard, and
Yeah.
I got 40, I got 35, 39 games in here. I could always do a sequel, and the thing is too, a lot of people don't know this, but like Japanese developers design a heck of a lot of games, and they don't necessarily talk about them. It's super hard to get a Japanese developer to open up to you. I've gotten several for my books, but I mean, it's very hard. So the shooter book is kind of like one of those where the couple of games that people could say, "Oh, well, you don't have Doom in this book." I can go, "Well, read the first book. Doom is in the first book." Like so. I'm very happy with the lineup of the Minds Behind the Shooter game. So that's done. That's coming out in like January, February. The next book after that is the Minds Behind Sega Genesis games. That's finished. That's been finished since like October. I'm holding on to it. I'm editing, cleaning up, because the thing is, I want to have like at least one book come out a year. I don't want to like flood the market all at once.
Yeah. Understandable.
But the Genesis book, man, it's like the Genesis book has like Sonic 2, Vector Man, Altered Beast, a ton of EA sports games, Earthworm Jim, The Lion King, Aladdin, like just so many great freaking games. Like putting that book together, I started that book in January of this year, and by March I had like 35 games,
Nice.
like right before COVID, and I was just like, I really thought COVID was going to make it difficult to get developers because I didn't know what was going to happen. Um, but the book moved along so quickly and so well that around May, about a week and a half before my son was born, I said to myself, I just wrote 3 books at the same time. I'm only writing one now. I feel like incomplete. I need another book. I need to write 2 books at the same time. So I was like, you know what? Mine's behind the PlayStation games. And I started that. Um, so right now, as of today, I have 39 chapters written in the Minds Behind PS1 games. So that book I'm probably going to have in probably around May. I'm going to have that finished by like May of this year, but obviously it's got to go through publisher and stuff like that. So that book's probably not going to come out until like 2022, like the early 2022. And I just started another book like 2 weeks ago. And I've got 4 chapters completed already. I've got like 15 developers already signed up. The minds behind the Sony PlayStation 2 games. And man, so like you were just talking before, how the PS1 was the first system that like you bought that you felt was like yours. I feel the same way with the PS1, but I was really young. I was like 13 when the PS1 was really hitting its stride.
Yeah.
I was 18, 19 when the
PSP
PSP.
came around, yeah. And that was the second console I bought.
Same thing. So it was just like I feel like that was my first adult system, and that was my first online gaming system too.
Yeah.
So already, um, NHL 2002 is one of my favorite hockey games of all time. Dave Warfield, I spoke to him. He's in the book. He's going to write the foreword. So it's all coming together. So like probably by next year at this time, I'll have 7 books finished, and probably like 5 out of the 7 out. So it's been fun. It's been really fun.
Right on. That's
Mhm.
good. So, what else would you like to talk about? I mean, this isn't a podcast where we're cutting away and only giving you like 15, 20 minutes
Yeah.
and then filling the rest of the hour. This whole hour is all yours, man.
I just I was having a conversation actually like 2 days ago with somebody, and they were talking about how the books were expensive because they're $40 each.
Yeah, I know. I paid for one.
You're awesome. And see, this is the thing. Like, you get it. Like, when we started the conversation, you were like, man, you put a lot of work into this. Like, this isn't easy, you know? And I feel like the way that I pitch this to people is I say, listen, you could buy a game for $40 that you probably play for like 20 hours, and you have an understanding of that game, a basic understanding of that game because you just played through it. Or you can spend $40 and you can have a tremendous understanding of 30 to 35 games and the creative processes that guided it and the people behind it, and that will affect your playing experience for the rest of your life. So you can invest $40 one way, or you can invest $40 another way. I'm like, I would never force you to buy the book. I would never tell you to not buy a game, and I would never tell you to buy my book, but I'm telling you that it's 2 different ways to spend your money. It's like this person told me that when they go to the video game store, they see a character that they like and they buy the game. So if they like Crash Bandicoot, they buy the game because they like Crash Bandicoot. They don't care about who made them, this and that. So I said, let me explain something to you. There's probably 20 Crash Bandicoot games across the PlayStation, PlayStation 2, GameCube, Game Boy Advance, PS4, all designed by different people from different walks of life. I mean, not every person has worked on every Crash Bandicoot. There's a Crash Bandicoot racing game. Like, they all play different from one another. If you understand how they were made, you'll have a greater appreciation for them. And if you like Crash Bandicoot 3 more than you like 1 and 2, then what you can do is you can look up the developer and say, oh, I wonder what else he made. Because you might like those games too. And those games could have been made by different companies. That's what I want. I want you to look at the people who made these games. I want you to ask more questions. I want you to go and look deeper than you have before. Those are the type of people that I feel really enjoy my books, because there's 2 different types of people that play games. There's people that just play to have fun and relieve stress and stuff, and then there's other people like me that look at it as an art form, as a way to tell a story, just like movies, just like music, just like theater. And these people need to be celebrated. It's like, I'll give you an example. So like Michael Menheim is a great example. This is a guy that's been in the video game industry for 30 years. You could be ordering a slice of pizza next to him, playing Mutant Football League on your phone, and have no idea that he was the guy that made it.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, I can attest to that because for me, 30 years ago, 25 years ago, I was sitting cross-legged in my living room playing Mutant Football League, playing Mutant Hockey League, and I'm the guy that when the game ends and the credits start to roll, I read the credits. I want to know who's in there, and I see all these names and whatnot, and I look up their stuff and things like that. But for me, I had no idea that 25 years later, I would be doing some writing for this guy and
Yeah.
talking to him face to face through Skype, stuff like that. And yeah, it's that feeling you get when a childhood hero is right in front of you and interacting with you, and you're getting to give them feedback.
Yeah. And it's just like, for some reason, we don't acknowledge them the same way that we would a great baseball player or a movie star or a singer, but they're no different from those people. And
no,
they've just never gotten the credit that they deserve.
no. Well, I, for one, am seriously happy that you put these books out, and
Thank
I
you.
can't wait to get more of them. I'll buy them a little bit at a time, but
Sure.
I'm most definitely buying them. And, if you want to spend another 10 minutes just chatting about whatever, feel free. And we'll get this all edited up and onto the YouTube channel. And like I said, you can feed it out to wherever you want to feed it to.
Sure.
And I'll definitely let you know when we're going to air it on our radio station here in Hay River. Yeah, I've already given you the link. And of course, if you want, you can pipe out all your links and whatnot to your social media and everything. Let everybody know where they can find Mr. Patrick Hickey Jr.
So I'll discuss like one more thing really quick before we get to the links. If you want to support me, the best way to do it is to buy directly from me for two reasons.
I can attest to the first reason, because it's personalized. You get goodies.
Yes. I mean, to me, it's like the best part, because I get to, first off, I get to know more about you. I get to know where you live. I get your email. I get to interact with you. I get to ask you like the things that you're interested in. And I want you guys to understand that it has a direct impact on the books, because 90% of the people that buy the books directly from me, they are on the Minds Behind the Games Facebook page. They are interacting with me on Instagram. And I always ask people questions. Like, I'm working on the PS1 and the PS2 book now, and there are games that are getting in those books because people that read me have asked for them. I mean, how cool is that?
Mode.
Oh, it's in already.
Yeah.
Jetmoto is confirmed for the Minds Behind PlayStation games, and so is Jetmoto 2. So it's very that was a crazy situation, because I didn't want to put Jetmoto 2 in there originally, because I got Jetmoto 1,
And quite honestly, from me to you, Jetmoto 1 was way better, in my opinion.
Let's edit that out. But two really cool and different stories. So I was like, okay. When he told me, because it's two different producers. So when the other producer told me the story behind Jetmoto 2, I was like, all right, this is really cool. So that's how it ended up getting in. But so the first thing is, obviously your copy gets personalized. But the second reason is that I get to interact with you, and you get to play a role in what happens next. Before I decided to do the Sega Genesis game, I was asking people, what's a console that you feel like deserves so much more credit? And people were just the Genesis, to the point where I was just like, okay. And I have a friend, Brett Weiss. He writes a lot of books about gaming too. He wrote the foreword to the first book. Really nice guy. And he's like the Nintendo guy. He's done a Nintendo book, a Super Nintendo book. So I'm like, you know what? People want the Genesis, and I'm going to be cool. And it's like almost like a gang in a way. Like, everyone has their turf.
Yeah.
I'm like, let Brett do his Super Nintendo stuff and his Nintendo stuff. I'm going to tackle the Genesis. And then I said to myself after, I'm going to tackle the PlayStation. So it's for personalization, and it's for connecting with me. And I mean, obviously, like, I'm going to be completely clear and transparent. I probably make like $4 or $5 more per book when you order directly through me, which helps. It's a coffee in the morning, and if you guys know me, I love my coffee. So buying direct helps me stay afloat. It helps me continue to do this. But again, too, the interaction is key. The word of mouth. I put cool stuff in people's books, like Pokemon stickers and trading cards and all sorts of cool stuff, because I want to have that connection with you. Because of COVID, I can't do conventions anymore.
Yeah.
And even though I have two small children, I would still go like New York, Pennsylvania, Connecticut, New Jersey, like around like my area, as long
Yeah.
as I would get home by the end of the day. But I mean, now that's out of the question. So I mean, that's why I do so many podcasts now, because I could do it. I'm in my kitchen right now. My dog is laying like right next to my feet. My arm is on top of my garbage can. Like I'm a homebody right now.
Yeah.
So when you order directly through me, it's the closest thing we can get to like actually like me shaking your hand and thanking you. So yeah.
Right
So
on.
the way you can do that is go to patrickhickeyjr.com/books, or you could just message me on Instagram at Patrick Hickey Jr. or on Twitter at ReviewFixPat. On Facebook, I'm Patrick Hickey Jr. So interact with me. I don't bite. I love to talk. So I'm up pretty late. So interact with me and join me on the adventure.
Awesome. Well, I'm glad I got to join you, and
Absolutely.
I'm glad you came in and did this interview with me. Considering, like
Absolutely.
I said, I don't do interviews. I
No, you
play.
were great.
Yeah. Well, thank you, sir.
No
I'm
problem.
definitely looking forward to the new books coming, and I'm working my way through the 3 I got here, and I'm loving every bit of it.
Thank you.
Again, thank you so much for coming on and taking the time to chat with me and FNA Gaming and the CKHR community. Again, I'll let you know as soon as we get this all edited up, and we're going to air it on the radio, so you can tune in as well and tell all your friends. Once
Absolutely.
again, Mr. Patrick Hickey Jr., thank you so much. And everybody else out there listening or watching, check out the minds behind everything that this guy writes. Thanks again. So, how about we cue the epic podcast intro music? Podcast.